So OP16 is here. And with it, we've got a whole new range of decks that are coming out. We've got all sorts of cool stuff around the corner with the new starter decks as well. And we have the old decks, and the deck that I've been playing non-stop for months. And we have the deck that everyone hates, which is Enel. And I have a lot of thoughts that I'd just like to get out there about Enel in OP16 at the moment. The new meta looks a little something like this. Lucy is unfortunately completely kicked out, just losing to more and more decks as time goes on. We also have Nami looking as strong as ever, and then some newcomers such as Teach and Rosinante being really heavy stakeholders in the meta and what's happening. And that brings us to Enel. As opposed to OP15 meta, where everyone's favorite decks or their pet decks or just generally the decks that they enjoy were completely walled out by Enel. Just being able to remove pretty much anything in a very non-interactive way. Having a 10,000 power unremovable body except via battle, which really limited what strategies you could do like 90% of the time. And basically was another coming of Emu, where being uninteractable and having a very strong, easy game plan made it so unless your deck beat that game plan, you really couldn't do much of anything. OP16, however, is quite different. Rather than having one or two big decks that basically rule out anything that doesn't beat them, there are so many other things that you can play. You have Black Yamato, which beats things that don't like being swung at for 5k a lot of times quickly, and nothing else. You have Teach, which is a late game powerhouse that can starve pretty much any opponent and build an unbreakable endgame board. Another great thing about this meta is it also brings back a lot of older decks. Unlike before, where you had to have something that you specialized in that beat either Emu or Ace, or now Enel and Nami. Instead, if your deck excels at anything in particular, it has other decks that it can beat. Basically, you need less of a specific niche, and now any niche can excel. This is pretty commonly referred to as a jungle meta, where if you excel at any one thing in particular, you will have a good matchup somewhere. Whether it be a deck like Jinbei, which is really good at breaking down decks that hate being swung at for 5k repeatedly, or you have decks like Rosinante and Law, which set up really strong walls which can actually wall out decks like Jinbei. This is actually pretty similar to what we saw with OP14, as after OP13 there were only Emu and Ace. OP14 added a large range of viable strategies that, unlike the consistency of Emu and Ace, instead relied on having really high rolls and overcoming the weaknesses of those two decks through really targeted specialized support. OP16 has done the same thing, and especially we're even seeing now with the new starter decks that there is a lot of NL-specific targeted support coming out for the majority of decks. Teach has Vasco Shot, which just so happens to rest a 6 cost, as well as Doc Q, which happens to pop 1 costs, which just so happen to be the cost of every character in Enel's deck. We also see that every single starter deck has specialized support for killing weenies, whether it be Smoker or even probably the worst card we've ever seen printed with Peckhams. All of these cards actively do something that counters Enel. So taking all of this into consideration, is Enel still good? Yes, very good. Too good even. Enel is not going anywhere because it is simply way too powerful in its current form. It is basically a test of your deck and your deck building skills if you can beat Enel. And unfortunately, a lot of older decks and decks that don't have support literally just cannot beat Enel. Enel's greatest strength basically comes from the fact that it can adapt to anything and everything really easily. If it's facing a meta that has a lot of cost-based effects, like against Thriller Slop or Mihawk, can easily tech in Vari to stop its Enels from being stunned. In other matchups, where that card is less relevant, it can simply cut it for more copies of like Divine Departure, which happens to be really good versus 10 cost Teach. Basically, Enel can adapt to anything, which makes it really not have any weaknesses and keeps it relevant no matter what happens. This is a pretty big problem, but OP16 is actually really good for Enel for other reasons as well. Going into more of the specifics why Enel is great, even now, is Enel's happy numbers. Probably not the best name, but basically there are certain power thresholds that Enel excels at dealing with. The combination of the Gamma Ragon or Gamma Knife into Thor decimates characters that are at 8,000 power. And pretty much every strong deck in the meta at the moment loves 8,000 power. You have Nami with Robin, who doesn't really like to be removed. They like having that on board dealing damage every turn. You have Teach with Shiryu, which is something that they also hate having removed. And they have Rosie and Law in Rosinante, which they really, really don't want to be removed, hoping for that continuous value of having an 8,000 power blocker. Another great power threshold is 10,000. This is the exact threshold of Gamma Knife plus Mama Ragon, and allows for an easy leader swing, an easy Reiju swing, Frankie swing, all of those fun numbers just by using those two cards. And Akos Teach is a great example of a card that falls directly under this umbrella, being something that Blackbeard will often rely on, especially in the later game if they miss several of their cards or they don't have enough of their 10-beard teachers. Overall, I think Enel is here to stay, to the point where Gamma Knife probably needs to be hit on the ban list. There are no decks that I feel are just using it in a fair and balanced way. Even like Rosinante is using Sakazuki instead, which is a lot less problematic, costing 7 Don, even if it gives you a body. It just limits what you can do afterwards. But Enel needing to commit only 2 Don, and then being able to do all those things anyway, I think is just way too strong at the moment, and we'll need to see. Putting it simply, Enel is just way too strong, way too versatile. Gamma Knife plus Momoragon, or Thor, or Divine Departure plus Elthor, all these things just allow Enel to keep going and never stop. Even when it's starved, you have like 20 cards that are card neutral in most builds, if not more, that just completely invalidate most of the starves, and to compensate for this, they're even adding more copies of Frankie. Even cards like Gum Gum Lightning are starting to tech more in. They're taking out their 4-cost Riplaws, they're taking out their Reijus. They are simply adapting way too fast for anything new to play. At the moment, your options are pretty much buy a new deck, spend a whole bunch of money and lose to Enel, or just keep playing Enel. This deck is just not going anywhere. It's going to be strong in OP16, it was strong in OP15, it's going to be strong in OP17 pretty much, unless they make some changes.